Welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast, a podcast for creatives. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi. Join me for compelling conversations with artists, actors, authors, musicians, and other creatives about the impact of the creative and fine arts in their lives and our ever-changing world. Thank you for listening. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Creative Piecemeal Podcast. I'm very excited to be joined by one of my writing friends, author Lisa Brideau. She was born and raised in Nova Scotia, Canada, in the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Her writing is inspired by the ridiculous quantities of science fiction she read during her formative years, with a crust of CanLit layered on top. She has degrees in Aerospace Engineering from Carleton University and Urban Planning from the University of British Columbia, and currently works as a sustainability policy expert. When she takes breaks from trying to prevent catastrophic climate change, she likes to write speculative fiction or practice her waltz. She lives in Vancouver, British Columbia, with her partner and her herd of cats, and she's most likely cuddling a cat right now. Welcome to the show, Lisa. So excited to have you here.
Thank you. Excited to be here. I am not, in fact, cuddling a cat at the moment.
Oh,
that is an anomaly.
maybe later in the show.
Maybe later.
How many cats do you have, actually?
We just have two. We're quite reasonable at the moment, just because we live in a small place. I would definitely have more if I could.
Just shy of a herd.
Yes. Yeah. Someday, aspiring to herd status.
There you go.
Yeah.
And speaking of inspiring, we're going to start with who or what inspired you to start writing?
This seems like an easy question, but I've always, as long as I can remember, been writing. So it's hard to find that kind of genesis moment. But I'd say the people who really strongly encouraged me when I was really young and presumably really terrible, I kind of put them in the place of inspiration. So my mom and my school teachers who would read the really long, presumably rambling pieces of work and tell me it was great and encourage me. And that kind of is what kept me going. And to the point where maybe I was less rambly and starting to build some skills. So I kind of credit them with finding that spark and fanning it in me in those formative years. In fact, I promised my grade 2 school teacher that I would dedicate my first book to her. So that's an outstanding obligation that I'm looking forward to meeting.
Oh, that's wonderful. And now you're agented and you're doing the writer thing.
Yeah. So I'm hopeful that I'll be able to write that a dedication section actually quite soon.
That's awesome. So you've held a lot of interesting professions, of course, prior to jumping into writing a little more full-time, including working for NASA. Can you tell us a little bit more about your journey to become a writer while doing that, and have those careers inspired your work?
Yeah, actually, when I went to do my degree, I went to a school that was quite well known for journalism. And people assumed I was going to pursue that because they knew me as a writer. And so when I told them I was going for an aerospace engineering degree, everybody but my physics teacher was quite surprised. But it had always been this kind of duality of being interested in physics and space and technical side, and then the other part of me that was really interested in creativity and writing. And so it's been two parallel tracks that have kind of consistently run through my life. And so my professional side has stayed fairly analytical, and then my writing has always been on kind of my personal time. And that's the passion I pursue when I'm looking for a break from work and looking to escape kind of into these other imaginative realms. Crossover, I'd say, in that I definitely lean towards speculative fiction. I like taking our world and putting a twist on it, or taking some element of kind of science fiction and bringing it into the work and using that as a playground. So in that sense, my work in aerospace and kind of just thinking about space and dreaming in that realm and all the science fiction I consumed in my life has played a part, I'd say. And today now, like a lot of my writing, it's hard for me to escape when I look to the future. It's climate change, and it's the impacts of climate change. And that's my daily job now, is thinking about that. So I can't in my writing not tackle that. So it's definitely, the tracks cross inevitably, for sure.
That begs me to ask, since you are involved in climate change, does that mean you're an ebook fan? Fans of electronic books?
Yeah, it's a good question. I love ebooks. I remember when they came out, I was just so happy because whenever I was traveling, it was always a debate about which books I would bring and would I have enough to last the duration of the trip. So ebooks took away that stress, which I love. Sometimes I really like having a physical copy of a book in my hands, and I think the sustainability is an interesting kind of realm these days because there's kind of environmental sustainability from a broad perspective that looks at all aspects of, like how do we create an ecosystem that supports us, that is healthy on its own right. Right now, we're really focused on climate change, which is about carbon emissions and the really dramatic need to immediately cut our carbon emissions to zero. There's less focus in my work, at least, on the other aspects of sustainability. So things kind of like, waste and material consumption, which has carbon implications. But yeah, I think paper used for books is not something that's been hugely on the radar. So I'm feeling okay about paper books at the moment. Feeling okay about that.
Although, interestingly, there is a paper shortage.
Totally a paper shortage, thanks to, the COVID supply chain issues. And
if anything, I feel like it just makes books all the more precious.
I don't think it hurts for us to stop and think about, and just be deliberate about the things that we're having in physical form.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always a good idea. About is there a more efficient alternative way to do this, or is this something that's meaningful and important, and we want to, expend the resources to have it in physical form? I think just generally being more deliberate about the things that we create in our world would be good.
Definitely more mindful and more grateful about all of that, for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah. So that when something is printed, it's like, it holds so much more gravitas.
Totally. When I was in high school and worked in a bookstore, I mean, you go to work in a bookstore because you love books. And when they took me out to the back to show me the returns process for paperback novels, which is that you tear the cover off and then you tear the paperback in half and you throw it away. And I didn't even think at the time they were recycling it. It was going in the dumpster. And obviously, as a book lover, that was horrifying. I was murdering books. And that was just how they returned unsold copies to the publisher rather than shipping the whole book back. They would just ship the covers back to prove that, it was unsold. So efficient, and I guess save the carbon emissions of shipping all these books back, but gutting and then just all this waste. It was a horrifying process. Still scarred from it all these years later.
I can imagine. All I can think of is like, what other creative use could someone make, like a wreath or something for their door with books,
Something, yeah. It was a mountain of pulped books. They don't do as many paperbacks these days, so like mass market novels are less common. So maybe it's inherently less of an issue. Let's hope so.
Right.
Yeah.
We're gonna swing to a more happy topic.
Okay.
And I'm wondering, what is your favorite thing about the writing process?
I love when an idea kind of comes to mind and then has that spark to continue. Like some ideas come and you kind of play with them for a bit and they don't stick around, but every now and then an idea sticks and then it starts to grow. And for me, this is before I've done any writing. It's just kind of ideas coming and going. And there's that moment where an idea starts to get legs. You start to think, the world starts to build in your head and characters kind of start to form. And it's still all in my head at that point, but I'm carrying it with me and it feels like a thing. So I've come to really love that part of the process about figuring out like, what stories do I want to write and which ones, are worth the massive investment of my free time. And I've come to realize that it kind of reveals itself to me. Like either the story sticks with me and I can't avoid it because it's just there and it's growing. So that's become nice and easy. I just like wait for the kind of that or kind of generate ideas until an idea becomes one of those. And then that process, the other favorite part is the process where you're writing it and it just all the pieces start coming together and you're able to kind of layer in a richness. I have to tell myself the story first, right? And then once I see what it is, I can go back and layer in all those details and that kind of richness that I just find that part so much fun. So a lot of it is a slog, but every now and then you get to these moments where you're just like, I see what the story is. I see the through line now of what makes it hopefully a really good, clear story. Now I can go back and emphasize that and peel away the stuff I don't need because I have this clarity of what it is that the kind of narrative arc wants to be.
Do you tend to be one of those people who overwrites and then you have to cut?
I feel like I'm a bit of both. I don't have any problem writing a significant amount of content. So cutting is good. I enjoy the cutting. I like that kind of chipping away and peeling away what's not necessary. But there's always some section where I'm really struggling to get any meat on the bone. So I feel like I have both moments. I have moments where some sections I'm just struggling to get it down, and then other sections got so much to work with, it's easy to kind of curve it back. I've definitely gotten to the point where I'm not precious about things the way I used to be. It's like, is it in service of the story? Yes, no. And then I don't delete it. I put it in a folder at the bottom so that it still exists in the world if I want to revisit it and say hello. But if it's not in service of the story anymore, then I'm happy to remove it, which was not always the case. Some things I used to hold on to really tightly, even once I recognized it wasn't working for the story. If I loved it so much, I used to feel like I had to keep it.
I think that happens with all of us. You're like, oh, it's such a great line. It
Totally.
belongs nowhere, but I love it.
Yes. Yeah. So there's such great chemistry between two characters, and you're like, this does not advance the plot in any way. It's not actually even necessarily in line with where the characters are in the story, but you just worked so well. Yeah. Cut it. Be ruthless.
Yeah, I think as we all get on that writing journey, we definitely go from being like really afraid to cut things to being like just ruthless.
Isn't it funny? Yeah. So it's part of the journey for sure, to get comfortable with that and to see the beauty in it, to see what kind of the advantage of removing it. And once you're able to see how things can be better by removing stuff that you love, I think that's the moment where it becomes this freedom to do that easily.
Yeah. It actually reminds me of like when people prune trees and bushes and plants and things.
Yes. I've recently started taking care of plants in our office, the ones that survived the great work from home pause. And it's that counterintuitive thing that sometimes cutting off a piece of the plant is the best thing you can do for it. But if you're not used to it, it's hard to do.
Especially if you've like named the plant. You're like, I'm sorry, Igor.
Sorry. It makes it easier to apologize if they have names.
Yes.
This is for your own good, I promise.
That's right. You'll get more leaves.
That's right.
So what is one writing rule that you break and one that you stick to?
I feel like I don't know if this is a writing rule, more of a writing practice, but the idea of you have to write every day, that's one that I don't stick to. I think it helps me stay in the story if I visit it frequently, but I have a full-time job and other things in life. So I think that pressure of feeling like you have to write absolutely every day can be detrimental. So I think it's important to kind of have some grace around what your life needs. And also sometimes you need to step away from writing to refill the well. Like you need to go and experience life. So if I'm always at my work computer and then I just switch to my writing computer, I don't have as much to draw from. It's one of the ones I deviate from. I see it a lot and I worry about what expectation that's writers are putting on themselves that might be actually kind of stifling them, because they feel like to be a proper writer, I have to write every single day. It's what Stephen King does. Like if that works for you, that's amazing. And you'll be very productive, presumably. But if it's not working for you, I think that's the kind of thing you have to be able to let go and find the rhythm that works for you. And that it took me a while to get to that. I'm finding the balance between how much of my time I spent writing and how much of my time I spent just recovering from a stressful day at work. And it's okay to do other things when you need just that time to process other things in life. So that's one of the ones I don't adhere to. There's so many writing rules, aren't there?
Yeah.
Which ones do I follow? I'd say being really critical, kind of what we were talking about before, about is something helping your plot in some way? Is it advancing your external plot? Is it advancing kind of the internal transformation of your character? Or is it really revealing something about character or the world? So I think there's a lot of reasons why something can be in a story, but you have to know the reason. And I think if you know the reason for the scene that you're writing or the bit that you're writing, great, and fight for it if you believe in it. But if you don't know why it's there, then that should give you pause about whether or not it needs to be there. So I'd say that's probably one of the most useful writing rules I've come across. It makes sure that I'm being deliberate in what I'm writing and there's an intention behind it.
That's a really good one.
Yeah.
Especially like I'm a pantser when I write, and I definitely get lost in the beauty of just the words and the paragraphs that I'm like, oh, this has nothing to do with the story. No forward movement.
I have so many pages, hundreds of thousands of words of writing where I didn't really have a plan for a story and I was just kind of going where it took me, which was fun and can generate some great stuff, but a lot of kind of dead ends and rabbit holes I went down. And I'm more of a hybrid now where I want to make sure There's the exploratory writing phase where I let myself do whatever I want. But then when I'm actually kind of structuring a novel, then it's everything needs to have some kind of reason for being there. And it can be beautiful description. Like I really want to have this evocative setting. And then you're allowed to have description. That's fine, right? It's not that you can't have moments of just beautiful language. You just need to know the reason why you're doing it, I think.
So what are some ways that you deal with writer's block, or have you been fortunate to not really have that so much?
I've not really had writer's block. I've had plot. I've gotten stuck on plot, like a particular point where I can't, the project is a bit stalled because until I know how this problem is the story is resolved, I can't really move forward. So I'd say that's the closest thing I can think of to writer's block, where I just don't know I don't know how to move forward the story forward. That I've resolved by finding a very, very, very patient person who will talk the plot out with me, which forces me to explain everything. In fact, it's most helpful, I'd say, if they haven't read the story. My poor partner has not read the novel that my agent currently has, but he has had to talk through many, many plot points as I tried to revise that one repeatedly. And he hasn't read it, which forces me to explain everything to him, which helps me understand what I was doing or trying to do. And then he'll propose solutions, and then I have to explain why those solutions don't work, which is very frustrating for him because I'm constantly telling him why his answers don't work. So it's a frustrating process on his end. It's great for me though. And just the act of talking it out forces me to think it through and think about like, why am I being so stubborn about a particular thing? And sometimes it reveals that I'm being really stubborn about wanting it to be a particular way. And that sometimes frees me up to be like, okay, well, if I let go of that and I'm willing to try something completely different, does that unlock the problem? And it helps me get outside my own box. I get really stuck in my own rut of it is this way, I wanted it this way, it has to be this way. And then if I'm brainstorming a plot point with a problem, and they don't have that kind of parameter, they don't think it needs to be that way. And so they'll make suggestions that are completely not ones I would have thought of. And then I have a bunch of ideas to explore, and then I force myself to explore them, even though I don't want to, because I like it the way it is, and I want it to work the way it is. I think the path through is having to open yourself up wider to more options and experiment, and then just see where that takes you. And usually it's not the suggestion that was given to me, it was in the process of exploring that suggestion, something else was sparked that I wouldn't have thought of otherwise.
That's really neat.
Yeah. So find yourself a really saintly, patient person who will let you yammer at them about plot that they don't know about.
Right. Yes. No, I completely agree. Talking things out is always so helpful in the creative process. It really lets you think of it in a different way.
Yeah. There's so much just sitting at your own screen and getting out of that mode and kind of exploring your story verbally, I think makes you think about it differently.
Mm-hmm. If you could do any other creative art besides creative writing, what would it be and why?
I do a lot of creative things in the kind of making realm. So there are some things there that I'd be curious to explore, like fiber arts. Like I've dabbled in weaving, and I've kind of always wondered what you could do in weaving. But realistically, I kind of want to cheat and say screenwriting. Because the idea of writing, but for a visual medium, is really interesting to me. I find, especially my first drafts, I do a lot of stage directions, just kind of moving characters around, and it's quite boring to read initially until I polish it. And so the idea that in a visual medium, yeah, certain aspects you don't have to worry about, like you're not in the head of the character, you can't be. So it's all about the external kind of actions and what's being said. And then the stage directions are kind of removed into a different form. I feel like that might be really challenging and interesting. Yeah.
Of what I've read of your writing, I feel like you could do that really well.
I think it's kind of how I kind of view stories. So I feel like it might be something that kind of lean into quite easily. I also really love that tension about, like when I do dialogue, it's so much about what's not being said, like characters who want something, and that tension about kind of what they're saying in the moment and what they really mean, and trying to get that on the page, that there's the external surface words they're saying, but trying to communicate what's going on internally and what they really want, what they're really kind of angling for. I love that. I find that so juicy, and the tension that's created there. And it feels like in screenwriting, there would be so much opportunity to explore that. Yeah, that would be fun.
That would be, yeah, no, I love that. It's masterful the way people are able to do that.
Yeah, the whole art of how good TV or movies come together, and the collaboration that is required for that. There's the script, but then kind of what the director chooses to focus on at any given moment. It must be interesting as a screenwriter. To some degree, you have to let go of control, and that somebody else is taking your work and that they're doing their thing with it. And does it turn out the way you intended? Does an actor interpret a line completely differently than you intended it and give it a whole other meaning? So in some sense, it must be scary, but you put it out in the world, like as a novelist, you're the one editing it. It is your words on the page at the end of the day. But for a screenwriter, they write the words and then they're out, and then other people are bringing it alive. And what are they bringing to life? Is it what you intended? Yeah, that would be challenging. I think I like having control over the finished product.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of TV and movies, are there any that have seeped into your writing, or things that you just enjoy that inspire when you write?
I've really enjoyed the things that are unexpected. That's the big thing for me lately. Like Umbrella Academy, I haven't read the kind of graphic novels, so the TV show is my first exposure to that world. And I mean, there's some weird stuff happening. There's a lot of weird stuff happening in that story about kind of cast of people who all have special abilities and are kind of raised as siblings in this really screwed up home environment. And it's set in our world. Mostly looks like our world, except that people have these abilities, but there are no cell phones and there are no computers. And it's just kind of this delightful, I feel like, example of the creativity you can take. It doesn't have to be this completely alien world. You can have a story set in our world, but tweak it slightly. And I love that. I feel like it lets us explore our situation and our lives just kind of like one step removed, because it is so familiar and identifiable and recognizable. But certain things are tweaked, something slightly different, and that lets us see things in a whole new light. So things like The Nevers is another good example. I'm kind of on a sci-fi TV series kick where it's characters in a world that we kind of recognize. The Nevers is like historical, kind of Victorian era, but it's not, it also isn't. I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but there's more going on there as well. And yeah, it's just a chance to look at our lives and our history from a slightly slanted angle. Delights me.
I'll have to check those out. I haven't actually seen either.
Ooh, you've got some good watching ahead of you. Yes.
Some binge watching to
totally.
To. Yeah. I must ask, are you by chance a Doctor Who fan?
Yes. Love Doctor Who. I frequently use the story I'm working on right now plays a little bit with time. And whenever I'm describing it to somebody, I'm always like, timey-wimey as my explanation for that part. And I think my comfort with that time being kind of out of order or whatever comes from Doctor Who and spending all this time in these stories that are told where time is just, part of the adventure and can be, if you're the Doctor anyway, you can travel through it as you need to.
I wondered about that. Yeah.
Yeah. I was recently watching YouTube clips about River Song and all the various times she and the Doctor meet up and how it's out of order. And it's just such a creative, amazing story about these two people who are in love across time and meet each other out of order and are always trying to figure out where they are in their process. And it's different for each of them. Like one of them, they've been together for a really long time, and the other one's maybe the second time they've met at that particular intersection. And how bizarre that would be.
Yes. Yeah. And it's so powerful when that happens, each time, because you're like, you're like shouting at the screen.
Yes. Oh my God, I was rewatching the scene where River's Song, it's the first time the Doctor has met her, and it's much later in their relationship for her. Again, I don't want to spoil it, but it's just when you know what's going on, when you've seen the whole arc, and then you're going back to that moment where when you first saw it, you didn't realize, but revisiting it, it's just such powerful stuff to imagine those people in that situation. And
that was a fantastic scene. Yeah. Not wanting to spoil it, but it's one of those things where when you go back to revisit the show after watching it all the way through, it's like, what the heck?
Yes, it's mind blowing. And I love that the writers, like they knew when they wrote that scene what was up. And I was watching a thing where the actress who plays River Song did not know. And so she was watching it back after the fact, just being like, yeah, it was intense.
That's an example of how plotting can be very helpful. Instead of pantsing.
Yes. You can see it in TV shows. Like some of the shows I love best, they knew at the outset the story they wanted to tell. The Good Place, such a beautiful example of that. They had a particular story arc they wanted to tell, and I think they knew it from beginning to end. I think it was 3 seasons maybe, and you can just tell there's this intention behind everything that they're doing, and they do some like reverse, like some surprising things in the course of that show to kind of what you think it's there to do, and they just flip the table and they're like, nope, and then it's quite shocking. But you can feel that intention all the way through. In contrast to something like, I remember, I never made it to the end of it, but Lost, lots of cool stuff was happening. But after a couple seasons, you got the sense that like they're writing themselves into a corner, and I don't think they have any plan for how they're going to get out of here. And then they have to pull some pretty hard to believe shenanigans to try and get themselves out of it. Yeah. So I love those shows where you can tell it's a package and that the writers get all the time and seasons they need to actually execute it and tell it to the end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. X-Files is another example. I'm such an X-Files fan growing up, but you knew they were just piling on weirdness after weirdness after weirdness. And I'm just like, they don't know where they're going with this. They don't have an answer. I'm here for the ride, but I'm worried. I'm getting increasingly worried with each season.
That's right. The truth is still out there.
The truth is still out there. Yes.
How has your life in the creative arts been different than you imagined so far?
It took me, I think, a long time to get serious about it. I think my professional life and going into engineering just took a lot of time, and writing had to be put aside for a while to do that. And then I picked it up again, and I didn't study it as a craft. There was a real reluctance on my part to actually dive in. I think there was a fear that I would lose whatever natural ability I had if I studied it mechanically, which was dumb. And I regret that. And I wish I had started studying craft far, far earlier, because that's what sparked me to kind of get further along and get more excited about what I was doing. Because I had skills and tools suddenly to apply, and it just made everything so much better and easier. But I didn't do that. And so I left it quite late before I actually studied it and was able to pick up those tools. But once I did, I think what surprised me is, I guess, how kind of quickly the process for me, which is a lot of luck and timing and variables at play, but like, finishing my first novel and revising it, and then getting an agent, and now going through the process with my agent to try and sell it to publishers. So, which it might not sell. It's a first book, so you never know. So I'm trying to keep that in perspective. But I think that process of finishing something and feeling like it was a thing, and then which came quite quickly after kind of buckling down and getting serious about writing as a craft, which I feel like there's a lesson there, which is like, if you put in the time and treat it like something that requires study and practice, and it's a craft, then that will pay dividends. Whereas if you dabble, which is what I was doing for a long time, it's fun, but it might not get you where you want to go. It depends what you're doing it for, really. But yeah, I think the surprise for me was once I did buckle down, how kind of quickly it became a serious thing that might actually get out into the world. Crazy to think about. Yeah.
And pretty soon, our bookshelves will be lined with your beautiful works.
That will be weird and amazing. It's going to be bizarre to walk into a bookstore and see something on the shelf with my name on it.
I look forward to it, though.
I look forward to you sending me pictures. I just love it when friends of mine have books that come out and other people are in bookstores sharing the photos of their books on the shelf, just to help them see it out in the wild. Just a part of the publishing journey process. It's very charming.
It is. You touched a little bit on something that you sort of wish you'd known or done earlier, but is there something else that you wish you'd known about writing or even publishing when you first started your writing journey?
It's so much about luck and timing. Almost aren't the right words. It's like the process of finding an agent and querying. You realize really quickly that, assuming that your writing is, up to a standard that, agents are looking for, which is hard to suss out because you don't know if you're getting rejected because your writing isn't ready yet, or for the thing that I want to talk about, which is they just have to like it. And when I think about when I go to a bookstore or I pick up books, there can be a book that based on its description should be something I'm all over and would love. And it just doesn't work for me. I'm just not getting into it. And then there's other things that by its description I should hate, and I totally fall in love with it. And so looking at it from an agent's perspective, and then later in the process, editor's perspective, it's hard to know what kind of confluence of writing style plus concept plus execution is going to hit all the marks for them, to the point where they can take on so few things. Is this going to be one of the few they take on? And it's when you're in the middle of it and you're facing all that rejection, it's hard to be comforted by this idea, but it's that confluence of events is something that's really hard to predict. And you can read all the bios of the people and do your best to try and find a good fit, but it's just something I think it's really hard to predict.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know if there's anyone that could have explained that to me earlier in the process in words that really resonated. It might just be something you have to go through when you're seeing the rejections come in, and sometimes if there's reasons for it. The best advice I heard actually recently was, if this is more about revising and how to know when you're done revising, but it was like, when the feedback stops being the same, you're done. Because at that point, it's in the area of subjectivity, and people are just giving you their subjective opinions of, they would prefer it more in this direction, or they would prefer something else. But if there's no consistency to the feedback, which would signal that there's a consistent problem that everybody's seeing, then that's one sign that you might be done. And I kind of carry that into this realm of waiting to see if an editor is interested in my story, which is, if all the feedback is coming back as there's a particular reason why they're rejecting it, then that's something I should look at. But if they're all saying different reasons why they're rejecting it, then it's just their taste. It wasn't matching their tastes.
I hadn't heard that before, but that makes a lot of sense. It really does.
Right? It's such a subjective space, writing, and the reasons why people something resonates or they fall in love with it. You can't write to that. You have to write, the story that you're writing, and then see if there's an audience or a market for it. That's my approach. Other people totally write, to a market and are probably great commercial successes for it. But the way I write, there's a story and there's my natural kind of approach to storytelling. And it's, can I find a home for that versus trying to spend too much time molding myself into a shape that I just can't hold.
Yeah. And along those lines, is there a common myth or stereotype that you hope to break with your work?
I think there's the myth of the tortured writer. There are a lot of people on book Twitter who are just like sharing the challenges of writing in very dramatic terms and how, hard and torturous it is. And there definitely are parts where it's torturous, but hopefully there's joy in it as well. Otherwise, I don't know, don't do something if it's 100% torture.
Right.
So I feel like that idea that you have to suffer for art, that's one path, I guess, but I think if you can find the joy in it, then that's the better way, if you can possibly find it. Yeah, so I don't know if my work is helping to offset that, but I guess maybe the other thing that if I'm successful in filling a bookshelf with my work is the idea that you have to have particular training in it. Like, I don't have an MFA. Like, my background is engineering, urban planning, and sustainability. So can be self-taught I think if you put the time in. So yeah, you don't have to go to an expensive school and get an expensive degree. Like, if you're passionate about something, and I take courses and I go to conferences and I try to learn what I can on my own. And so I think it can be done. So that would probably be the other thing I'd encourage folks to keep in mind.
Yeah, definitely. There's so many different paths to carving out a life in the creative arts, and it doesn't always have to be a school-based path.
Definitely. And I think we get better kind of diversity of perspectives if we are more open to people who come at it from different angles, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So one last question, and that would be, in your own words, what does it mean to live a creative life?
This is where we get a risk of me being rambly. I have to make things. There's not a kind of version of the world where I don't make things. And that if that's knitting while I'm watching a Netflix show, or annoying my partner by shoving a weaving loom in our living room, or whatever it is. So I feel like there's something about that act of making something in whatever media or form it is, but creating something that wasn't there before, that is informed in some way by you as the creator. I think it activates a different part of our brains than our, jobs might. And I feel like that's the thing, that there's some magic there and some energy that is important to me. When I don't have it, or I don't have the opportunity to kind of express that, I get twitchy. So I don't know what it means to live a creative life other than to try and have an outlet to create something. And sometimes just to create it for the joy of the act of creation, not for the end product or with the intention of selling it or commercializing it. Just to be in that space where you're making something where there was not something before, which is pretty amazing and magical when you think about it. Our ability to make something sometimes out of nothing. Just like writing is bananas. You're creating a world in your head and somehow putting words on paper so that other people can have the same hallucination that you had in your head. That's crazy pants. Who decided that was a thing? And how are so many of us so kind of caught up in doing it?
It is interesting though.
Shared hallucination is somehow somebody can describe writing. Like that's weird and accurate in a way.
So I'm going to throw in a bonus question. If you could bring back any creative artist from the grave, who would it be?
I'm bringing back a bundle. I'm bringing back all the Bronte sisters.
Ooh.
I read a massive biography of the Bronte sisters, and I happened to be in England for writing. My sister lives in England, and I was going to a writing retreat there, and it was near Haworth where they lived. And so I visited their parsonage, and I happened to be halfway through this like 600-page biography, and it just really fascinating people for their age as women in that time. I mean, staggeringly creative, all three of them. And then just death, like the sisters all dying, and just the impact that sisters passing away had on the ones who were left. And it's just a really kind of tragic tale of like having lost those artistic minds when like they could have, like, imagine what they would have produced and what they would have done had they lived longer. And but really would love to have a conversation with them about their perspectives, because they seemed to be anomalies for their era and how they viewed the world and the beauties that they held and were willing to express in their writing. So apparently super introverted and just really not good with people. So it might be a really awkward conversation, but I think we could manage it.
That would be fascinating. It sounds like it was a powerful trip though, especially because you were doing the bio at the same time.
It was amazing. It was, yeah, like this confluence and complete coincidental confluence of events where I was reading this biography and then was physically in their town and then went to a writing retreat. So I was like, this is really good inspiration to just be staring at their writings in this museum where they used to live, in the town that used to be like choked with coal dust, and just trying to picture, like, it's a beautiful town now. It's a huge tourist destination, but they have some pictures of like what the parsonage looked like back when they lived there. It was this barren, treeless thing, and you're walking over the moors, which is something that was very frequently done in the novels. And there's the kind of beautiful but also desolate kind of landscape, and you're like, this was their world. And then you go to this beautiful writing retreat by the Arvon Foundation. If anyone ever has a chance to be in England, the Arvon Foundation is a nonprofit that sets up writing retreats, basically just to encourage and support writers, fairly affordable. And they set them in kind of English manor houses in the countryside in very beautiful remote locations where there's nothing to do. So you have no distractions. It's like once you've walked down the country lane, you've done it. There's nothing to do. You might as well go back to your desk and write. So beautiful vistas to look at that are very inspiring and no distractions, which is perfect.
Oh, that sounds lovely. Oh, I have another bonus question because it's morning and I'm clearly not awake yet. What writing resources like craft books or websites do you recommend? And this will officially be our last question.
I've read so many writing craft books, and some of them, I think it's that thing of like, I take ballroom dance lessons, and sometimes my instructor will say something to me. We've been doing this for over 10 years now. Sometimes my instructor will say something and it'll click, and I will understand finally what he's telling me to do. And I will realize he's been telling me to do this for 5 years, but it wasn't until he phrased it in a certain way that it clicked for me, and I internalized it, and I'm like, now I understand. And I think writing craft books are the same way. I think a lot of them are saying the same thing. They're saying it in different ways, and you've got to find the book that says it in the way makes it click for you, makes it stick and resonate for you. So my advice, honestly, is to just read as many as you can. Like Anatomy of Story is one that I find useful. I recognized as I was reading it that it was repeating things I had read in all these other craft books. It just happened to be wording it in a way that kind of aligned with how my brain works. So that one is useful for me. I just finished a book on writing by Chuck Wendig, which he's fun because he swears a lot. So that's always nice. It's like, this is a different kind of craft book and I like it. I'd say every one I read, I pull something from. But yeah, I don't know. If there are show notes, maybe I can put my top recommendations. I'd want to think about it. Those are the ones that kind of really held the gems for me.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds great. We'll definitely include Lisa's tops in the show notes.
Yes, perfect.
Awesome. Well, Lisa Brideau, thank you so much for joining us. And listeners, check the show notes when This drops for Lisa's website, how to find more about her upcoming projects, and of course, her top lists of books to recommend. Thanks, and thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Like the show? Have a question? Stop by the Facebook and Instagram pages. Links are in the show notes, or search for Creative Piecemeal Podcast on social media and click follow for all the latest.